Hi, Cassandra. Thanks for being here. Thank you so much for taking the time on this first Monday of January.
Yeah, no, I'm in Vancouver right now, visiting my parents. So when you said Pacific time, I was like, perfect. Good timing for me.
Uh, and so you're in Vancouver right now, but you
I am.
actually you grew up on the West Coast. Where did you actually grow up?
So I say that because it's easier for people to understand, but I grew up in actually Surrey. So it's
Hmm.
like a suburban neighborhood in Vancouver, and then it's just like a little bit outside of the city. So yeah, I grew up by the mountains, by the beach, just doing everything outside. So when I moved to Toronto, it was like, wait, what? Like, where did the trees go?
And are you going to school in Toronto currently, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
That's why I moved there. So
And what are you doing these days? You are studying journalism in
yeah,
school, I believe, and you're somewhere kind of in the middle of your four-year college degree.
I actually almost done. So this
Ah,
upcoming semester is my last semester. So I'll be entering the second semester of my fourth year, and so I have going to be graduating with a major in journalism and a minor in political science. So that's what I focus a lot on. I start an internship next week, so that's really exciting for.
wow, congratulations.
Thank you. I started for as part of my program, so just really busy with that, and then I work a couple jobs. So yeah.
Busy as ever, I'm sure.
Mhm.
Any, no need to have any, but do you have any kind of definitive post-grad plans?
Get a job, get health insurance.
Fair.
That would be my main focus. And then from there, still working on her uterus. It's my plan. I would
Hmm.
love for that to be my full-time job one day or something in that area of study. I'm not totally sure what that looks like yet. But thankfully, my degree is really transferable to a lot of different jobs and types of jobs. So I'm really excited to see where it takes me.
Absolutely. As you mentioned, Her Uterus is your platform. You have a blog and a website as well as an Instagram where you talk about a lot of issues around female health, specifically mostly talking about female pelvic pain. And diving right into your story, you started having pelvic pain at the age of 13,
Mhm.
and you had quite the journey of getting diagnosed. And I guess my first curiosity is, being so young and at an age in which your identity and self assurance is really only just starting to surface. Were you ever hesitant to openly discuss your very female centered symptoms? How did you, in some sense, avoid being silenced by the taboo that unfortunately does exist around periods and pelvic disorders and pelvic pain?
Yeah, so it's really interesting that you say that because I definitely talk about it all the time now. But I did succumb to the taboo-esque of the conversation for many years, um, in relation to, not really talking about it with friends, definitely not explaining to my teachers why I was missing class, not getting accommodations for my schooling for the longest time because I wanted to be treated like everyone else, and I didn't honestly, I was a little bit scared of what people would think, which sucks to be that young and have to balance the thoughts of other people's and your own. In my house and in my life, I had very supportive parents. My mom also has endometriosis, and so she always talked about it my entire life. She went to events when I was a kid. It was just like part of my growing up. We just never really shied away from those topics. And so when I got my first period, my parents were on it. They were like, how much pain are you in? How are you feeling? And from the very first day, it was a lot of pain. And they noticed that. I noticed that,
Mm.
just from knowing my mom saying, like, you shouldn't be in this much pain. You shouldn't be feeling this way. Otherwise, I probably would have just thought it was normal, like everyone else in the world. But thankfully, they were really involved, which made a difference, I think.
Hmm.
And from there, I think it was about a year. We waited it out to see if it would regulate itself, my period, if it would, diminish in pain, because that's what they tell you to do. And then the year following, I like basically passed out on my bathroom floor. My parents were like, this is it. Like, we're not doing this anymore. And they took me to my family doctor, who then tried to tell me it was just, she was like, you're just blessed with bad periods, like, sorry, hun. And I was like, actually, no, my mother has this diagnosis. It can be hereditary and passed down through generations. And, I'm worried about that. and she didn't want to do anything besides prescribe me birth control, which obviously works for some people, but that was not the case for me. So my dad, I clearly remember he like fought with her and he was like, we can't leave here until we have a plan moving forward beyond just medication. And so they gave me an ultrasound, which diagnosed me with PCOS. And then from there, it just kind of continued. But yeah, it was always a conversation in my household. I just never really talked about it outside of that, if that makes sense.
There's a lot to unpack there. And one thing that I took note of when I was reading your story is that it was your dad that took you to that first appointment. And it
Yeah.
was your dad who so fiercely advocated for you. And somewhat sadly, I was very surprised that it wasn't your mom that took you. One, because she's a female, and two, because she also had the illness. And I think, do you think it was just your mom's experience and your dad being so close to your mom's journey with endometriosis that allowed him and you to work together as an advocacy team? And did you ever stop and think, wow, my dad is incredible, and I wish everyone had that kind of support from the male people in their lives?
Yeah, I guess at first I didn't really see it as like a big deal because he was involved in every other conversation that we had about it. And so it was just like, he had an opening in his day that day that he could take me, and it wasn't even like a second thought. My mom was also working and she was kind of like, this works best for our family. Can you take her? And he was like, absolutely. And then I went home that day. I think I missed school, and so he stayed home with me. Um, so yeah, it wasn't really like a thought, I guess. And then, especially once I entered the advocacy community on her uterus, and people started talking about their experiences with like finding partners and talking to family about it, I realized that I was in a very unique situation in the fact that my dad was with my mom before she was even diagnosed, and then when she
Mm-hmm.
was diagnosed, he was there for all of it. So in that case, he did a lot of research, a lot of reading, a lot of talking to doctors. He never missed a doctor's appointment, a specialist appointment. Like he never missed a single one for me. It was always both my parents that went to every single meeting. And we definitely got a couple double takes from my specialist. She was like, "Hello, team. Like, how are we today?" But she loved it. She loved the work that my family and I did to improve my health. So it was a really great support system to have as a young person going through it.
I think that's fantastic. I was also blessed with parents who showed up to every specialist appointment and every big milestone of treatment and hospital stay, and it made the world of difference, not necessarily in the outcome of the treatment always, but definitely in the way in which I was mentally able to handle the difficulty in which I was experiencing. And I can imagine that you would have a very similar experience of looking back and appreciating the fact that your support system probably supported you in a way that allowed you to continue to be successful outside and beyond your illness.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
yeah, and I think one interesting tidbit of your story is also you had this really supportive family, as you've mentioned, and you went and you got this PCOS diagnosis. And then you mentioned that when you came home from that, you really didn't talk about it at all. You had the diagnosis, you kind of digested it within yourself, and your family obviously knew about it, but beyond your family, and it's interesting because even though they were so supportive and it was so talked about within the family dynamic, you still didn't feel like it was okay to extend beyond that immediate circle and really, in some sense, publicize it and be vulnerable with the people who were in maybe your second tier circle. And then eventually you did develop and start writing on her uterus, and you have this platform now. And so what do you think ignited that mental transition where you thought, I am ready to talk about this and this is important enough for me to share?
Yeah, that's a recent revelation. Within the last couple of years, I had surgery when I was in high school when I was 17. I had a laparoscopy with excision and ablation to remove endometriosis and to diagnose me. And so I missed like the most school that I've ever missed, and people were really confused. They're like, "Where did Cass go? She never misses school." And even when I came back, I didn't tell anyone because I really, really didn't want to talk about it. I think I posted on like a Finsta spam account that I had, but I didn't talk about. I just posted a picture of me like going into surgery, and I was like, get well soon, guys. Like, I'll be fine, whatever. But I didn't talk about it beyond that. And people knew kind of not to ask any more questions. Like I said, because I didn't want to be treated any differently than the student I was and the person I was. I didn't want people to see me any differently, which is sad because this is part of my life and it's part of what makes me who I am. And I kind of wish that I could have embraced that a little bit sooner because it has changed my life and it is part of, like I said, who I am. So that continued into university, that continued into like way beyond just high school. I told like a couple close friends in university because I got really sick the first month. I missed like quite a bit of school during that time as well. And so I kind of had to tell them. At the
Mm.
time, I was living in a student residence across the country from my family, my parents, my doctors, my specialists. Like I was very much on my own. So I kind of had to lean on them. And so they knew about it. And then from there, like I didn't have accommodations for university for any of my classes, which looking back was a mistake, I think. I remember going to my political science classes and just writhing in pain because they were not very, I guess, friendly when it came to missing class. They like took attendance, it was part of like your grade. And I really wanted to learn. I really liked the things that I was learning, and I didn't want to sit in my student residence all day in my bed. I wanted to go to class. But I remember thinking like I shouldn't have to be here. This is crazy. Like I shouldn't have to be sitting here trying to balance my pain and also learning and also my happiness and also my mental health. It was a lot. And so I was really stuck and really angry and really sad and just felt like things weren't improving. You know, I had had surgery. It was a wonderful 2 years right after surgery. I felt little to no pain, got to do things I never would have ever imagined because of it. But then eventually the pain started, slowly working its way back, and that really affected my mental health. And I went to an appointment with my specialist, and she basically said, like, I know that you're in pain, but it's too soon. Like I can't do another surgery for you. It's going to do, long term, it's going to have long term issues. You're going to have scar tissue. It could affect other issues in the future. And we can't. And I was advocating so hard for that. And when that didn't happen, it was very, very, very heartbreaking. And I told my friends from university what had happened. And they basically said, we've always said, writing is your superpower. This is the gift that you've been given. And maybe it's time that you start using that for this. And I was like, I can't write about it. It's too painful. Like, I've never written about it. I don't think I will. And they were like, just try, like, just make it, make an Instagram account and just do it for family and friends. Like, you control who follows it, make it private. And just do it like a diary, just for family and friends. And that way you feel a little bit more supported and you just have another outlet and just see how it goes. And I was really against it. And then I was like, I have nothing to lose. I'm trained in this for journalism. We do social media training. I know what I'm doing, and it can't really do any harm. And so then I made the account and I started very, very slowly, like dipping my toes into talking about certain things. And, family and friends were following it and it was going great. And then as I got more comfortable, I started talking about like other diagnoses that I had had, vaginismus, vulvodynia, all these different topics, and creating informational graphics and answering DMs from people, and it just kind of like grew way faster and way bigger than I could have ever imagined. This was never my plan. It was always just supposed to be for family and friends, and it's obviously grown into something way beyond myself, which is beautiful and wonderful to be part of. But that's definitely a recent thing, like feeling comfortable in talking about this. And it came from a place of desperation, I think, and confusion and sadness and a need for community. And so I thought, if I need community, I'm sure other people need community, and I should just be the one to do it.
It's fantastic that you are using your skills, your talent, but also the ability that you have cultivated in school on top of that to really create a space that is safe for so many women. And I think why her uterus grew so rapidly, much to your surprise and not very much to mine, is that it is not talked about. And when you find someone who is not only sharing their story, but putting out information that is approachable and digestible and easy to understand in a way that is very in some sense safe. It doesn't feel big and scary in a lot of the ways in which you post about it. And I think that creates a space that people want to be in and want to be supportive of, regardless of if they are going through the exact same thing or not. Just anything around female pain and, period pain and pelvic issues. Just no one, very few at least, are big champions of the message that this is normal. This happens to 1 in 10 women, if not more, and it's underdiagnosed, and this needs to become part of the conversation in our communities. And I appreciate that you are using your powers for such a good cause. And I wanted to go back though, because when you were diagnosed with endometriosis at 17, you said it was a moment in your life that you will never forget. You felt at peace, in pain, but at peace. And I wanted to zone in on this moment because I think it's really an interesting testament to what happens when someone who's chronically ill secures a diagnosis. So why do you think that you felt such a deep sense of relief when you were handed what is truly a really difficult diagnosis?
Yeah, and I think it's also really interesting to talk about this in the endometriosis community because it can be so hard to get a diagnosis due to the fact that you have to have surgery.
Mm-hmm.
And then normally before that, you have to rule out every other possibility because they don't want to just give you surgery if you don't need it. And so that can be incredibly difficult, not only for, a young person, but also people of color, people who, identify as transgender, people who are in transition. There's a lot of obstacles to overcome. And I am aware of the fact that I had it a lot easier than a lot of people because one, I had people advocating for me on my behalf, but I was also a young white girl. It was just easier for me than some people. So just wanted to put that out there. And then also, I think the reason I felt so at peace was because one, I had gotten the surgery, which was a feat in its own because, it was being rescheduled and it was moving hospitals and I was doing paperwork. It was a month long process just to get into the OR. And then from there, I knew that I could go into surgery and not have anything show. I could put in all this work, go through all of this pain, go through the recovery, and miss school, do all these things, and then have no answers. That was completely possible. And so I had to kind of weigh the pros and cons, weigh the options, and understand that just because I was doing this thing doesn't mean I was going to feel better or, I don't know, get the answers I was looking for. And so at that point, I just rectified with myself that even if I don't have the answers, at least I have an answer, which is it's not this thing, and let's move on to the next thing. And so when I came out of surgery, I really didn't react well to the anesthetic, which was surprising to me. I had anesthetic before for other surgeries, and it wasn't a good vibe. It was really hard. I was in and out of recovery multiple times. And eventually, I was well enough to leave, which was awesome because all I wanted to do was get out of there. And I waved goodbye to my specialist, which is also unusual. Normally, you don't see them afterwards. So it was really sweet that she was like, bye, get home safe, like whatever. And she was also the only face that I recognized in the OR, in the hospital in general. So it was very nice to say goodbye to her. And I was in the wheelchair and we were going to the car and I was completely out of it. I took like a Snapchat video, I think. And I was like, my dad was pushing the wheelchair and I was like, hey guys, I'm out of surgery, like blah blah blah. Yeah, I just was so out of it. And we were getting in the car. My parents were really quiet, and I was really quiet. And as I was like, they were helping me get in the car in the back seat. I was like, did they find it? And my parents were like, yeah. And then I just remember like this overwhelming moment of being like, I was right, and my parents were right, and like everything that I've done. Sorry, this is like kind of emotional. Everything that I've done up until this point was for this moment to feel this at peace and this righteous in my choices and in the advocacy that I've done for myself. And I have yet to feel that kind of peace again in my life. It's indescribable. But I know a lot of people that have gotten their diagnosis and feel the same way. So I think it's important to talk about because it can also be a really wonderful and beautiful moment. It's not always the case. Obviously, there's a lot of other things that come with having surgery, but sometimes it can also just be really impactful to a person.
I have to wonder if the foundation of turmoil had not been set by people who had truly gaslit your experience, and if you had not had the kind of shame and taboo, or not, or if it didn't exist around pelvic pain, if that sense of peace would have been maybe less intense, but in a good way, in the sense of if you had been believed all along. Because it sounds like most of the sensation of peace and validation stemmed from being proven right, as you said. And if you had been believed from the beginning, if that first doctor that you went to when you were 14 had said, oh, you might have endometriosis, and let's figure out how we can best address this, and let's figure out what the plan is moving forward, because you're going to have periods for several years to come, very likely. If that experience of finally securing a diagnosis after surgery would have been any different for you.
I think that the first time I felt, I guess, supported or, righteous minded or in my decision or at peace was when I met my specialist that I had. I had quite a few before her, but this was the first one that I'd had at Children's Hospital, which made a huge difference. Um, I think that, seeing her and her being like, you probably have this thing, it would make sense given your genetic history, given your symptoms, given everything that you've tried. This is the end goal that we're going to set. And then for years before that, we worked on so many things. I went to public floor physical therapy. I went to classes. I went to different workshops. I saw different doctors. I did different medications. I did everything possible. And the entire time she was saying to me, I believe you. Like, I know what you're feeling is 100% valid. I want you to know I see this every single day. I've seen it in people like your mom. I've seen it in people that are younger than you. I've seen it in people that are older than you. I see it all the time. And I want you to know that I believe you. We just have to do these things to make sure we're not causing more harm. And that made sense to me as a young person. And that was I think the first time that I was like, okay, I'm on the right path and things are gonna turn out okay. But I think you're right in the sense that I felt the specific emotion because I had been through so much internally and externally. I had a specialist that I saw before the one at Children's Hospital that told me the reason I felt the way I did was because I ate McDonald's. And my mom, she told that to my mom's face in front of me, acted like I wasn't even in the room. And as a young teenage girl, like that does irreparable harm to a person to say that the pain that they feel is something that they're doing to themselves or something that they should have better control over. Or even just to suggest that the things that they consume are of the fault of their own. Like it was really mind-boggling to me. That was never a conversation that we had had. So it also came out of left field, like things like that, trying different medications and people saying, well, if you had XYZ, this medication would work. Or, well, birth control works for people with endometriosis and it doesn't work for you. So it must be something else, which we now know is not the case necessarily. But again, this was many, many years ago. So yeah, there were definitely insensitive gaslighting conversations that we had, and so when I was diagnosed, it definitely felt bittersweet. But most of the word I would use is peaceful.
So when you started having the appointments with the Children's Hospital specialist, and she was saying, I believe you, and she was validating you, and she, what sounds like, made you feel like a team, was there still a level of self-doubt within you that it was endometriosis? Was there still kind of the scars of the past as far as the medical gaslighting that had gone on that you think fueled the validation you felt in the end?
I think at that point, I just was like so certain about what I was feeling. And at that point, I kind of was seeking out information elsewhere to, I guess, validate the things that I was feeling. I was like going on YouTube and watching Laura Parker from BuzzFeed. And she's like a huge inspiration of mine, has been since I was a kid. Because she was the only person that I could find on the internet that was talking about endometriosis and pelvic pain, which is so funny because now it's a gigantic community, which is wonderful. But she was kind of like the forefront of the community. And so I was seeking a community seeking information, seeking validation in that sense. And so by the time I saw the children's hospital specialist, I was just kind of like, this is what I have. Like I know it in my soul. Like I I can't tell you why I knew what I knew because it wasn't like things had changed. This is just always how I had felt, but I was very, very sure in how I was feeling. Of course, there's like the 1%, worry and the conversations my parents were having with me being like, so what are we going to do if you have this surgery and, nothing comes back, which is like, we don't think it's going to be the case, but you're a young person and we don't want you to go through that kind of heartbreak. Um, and ultimately the surgery was my decision. My specialist and my parents like totally let me make that decision. We went through the pros and cons for months at a time, my entire medical team and I. But ultimately, I signed the papers. I did everything. I made the decision myself, which was also, I think, a really wonderful thing to have that much bodily autonomy when I wasn't granted that in so many situations. Um, so, yeah, I think that by the time I saw that specialist, I was kind of like, I know that this is what I'm feeling, but of course, once you sign the papers, you're like, am I making the right decision? Is this the right thing to do? But I just had to trust in my conviction and in what I was feeling, and that's always what I tell people on Her Uterus when they ask me. It's like you just got to trust your gut, and if it's not, then you can find a different answer. It just won't be that one.
It sounds like, the physical confirmation just bowled over that last 1% of self-doubt and kind of really released the cap on that validation and the peace that you said then ensued once that had kind of settled.
Yeah.
And it's never the job of the people who are struggling to educate the world on their illness, but I think it is a fantastic thing that you are doing and you are educating people and you are spreading the word. So I think a worthy question to ask you is, what can other people do who may not suffer from painful periods, endometriosis, any kind of pelvic pain, female or male? How can they contribute to changing the narrative around this type of female pain?
Number one, understanding that there's cramps and then there's not living your life because you're in period pain. And I get asked that a lot. The people always say like, oh, I pass out in the bathroom floor too. It doesn't mean that I have whatever. And I'm like, yeah, that doesn't mean that you necessarily have endometriosis, but that simple fact is not okay. Like the simple fact that when you get your period, you can't go to school, you can't go to work, you can't go to social functions, you miss seeing your friends, you can't hang out with your family. Like that is an impact on your life enough that it's not okay. Like whatever it is, if that's vaginismus, like whatever the pain is, if it's not endometriosis, if it's something else, I don't know, meiosis, whatever, it's still not okay. And so I think that that is where my first step in advocacy lies is always, how is the pain impacting your life? What things are you struggling to accomplish when you're in this pain, which is hard for me as a person who is and has been rather high functioning with this. I know that there's people that have, disability compensation in different countries and things like that because of the pain that they feel. They can't go to work, they can't do these things, and so they need to rely on other means. And I thankfully have always been someone that I miss out on certain things, but I try and I have the ability and the resources to still try and go to work. I don't always stay at work, and sometimes I have to go home early, but I've always been well enough that I can push through. Whether that's a good thing or not, that's that's up in the air. But I think it's an important conversation to understand how this pain impacts your life, number one. Number two, understanding how it impacts like relationships around you, whether that be, with partner, whether that be with friends, family. That's a huge impact. Having a chronic illness like that can impact so many different aspects of your life beyond just the individual self. And so I think that that's another important conversation, how to tell your friends, how to tell your family, how to tell your partner. Because that's, if you're not feeling the pain, it's really hard to describe to someone else. So another thing that I talk about in terms of changing the narrative, I think a lot of it stems from the way that the medical system is structured. and how that is integrated into the things that we talk about. So things like, proper diagnosis with the right type of surgery, excision versus ablation. Excision is the gold standard. I didn't obviously know that at the time. I had both. So just, talking about uh, the proper procedures, talking about the proper medical terminology. Adenomyosis is not endometriosis in the uterus. It's just not. It's not the proper definition, and having the proper definition makes a difference in accessing care and finding the right doctor, and finding the right hospital, and finding the right medication. It's really, really important. And so, yeah, changing the way that the medical system and chronic illness interact is really important. Changing the way that we talk about this with the people around us, and then changing the way that we talk about it with ourselves and our inner dialogue, and the ways that we treat ourselves, and the different treatments that we try, just making sure that it's all balanced, which is really, really difficult. But I'm trying really hard to make a difference, and to make it a better environment than the one that I had and the one that I currently have. Just always trying to do better, but it's hard.
I think you're doing a fantastic job at helping people see the ways in which at least the narrative does need to change. And when you have something that affects your entire life, as you were saying, it becomes very necessary to then address it from every angle and point of view within your life, from healthcare to relationships to self-talk.
Mm-hmm.
And the good news is that since there are so many things and so many avenues in which it can be addressed, it's very easy for everyone to make some kind of small contribution. And whether it's just changing the way that you think about it within yourself, and maybe you have symptoms, and the way that you think about your symptoms, and reminding yourself that they are in some sense normal, not normal to the point where you shouldn't seek medical care, but normal to the extent of so many people struggle with this, as well as your experience in the medical system, if it's not serving you, is not okay, and that deserves advocacy. And so everyone can, if they choose to, which I hope they would, can make a small change and a small difference, at least, in contributing to the betterment of this community and the space in which it exists. And I think there was one quote on your website as we round out the conversation that I just wanted to narrow down in, because I wanted to challenge you a little bit on it. And it said, your diagnosis, you changed your life, and you admit that fully. But you made a comment that said, no longer was I weak or with low pain tolerance. And I sat with that for a minute, because I wonder do you see your medical challenges as, in some sense, hardening the egg, like challenging you to the point of kind of building a thicker skin and becoming tougher? Or do you think that you probably had the mental fortitude and toughness already within yourself, and yet chronic illness just highlighted what you were already capable of? Because in my point of view, from reading your story and learning as much about you as I could from your online space and your online community, is that I don't think you were ever weak. I don't think there was even a drop of weakness in your entire story from before diagnosis and being a 13-year-old girl and struggling with period pains. I see nothing but self-advocacy and self-belief, and, a true testament to what you believed that you deserved from medical care. And then you had this evolution of kind of intentional vulnerability in sharing your story that also takes a lot of bravery. And so I guess the main point is I just wanted to challenge you on, where do you see the weakness? Because I don't see any of it.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate that. It's very, very sweet of you to say. I think with that quote, in that specific article, I was more meaning like the way that society perceived, my pain, and the way that the conversations that I was having were changing my inner dialogue. And I think having my diagnosis was a bit of an armor for me, being like, I know this thing and I believe it. And then once I had my diagnosis, I was like, haha, I was right. Like, you don't get to tell me that my pain isn't real, or that I have low pain tolerance. So I think with that specific quote, I meant more like I don't know, just being validated in how I was feeling, and that
Mm,
those other aspects of my journey no longer felt like part of it once I had my diagnosis. But in terms of um, feeling strength, I appreciate the fact that you see that in me, but I didn't see that in me, and I think that that's a lot of the conversations that I have on Her Uterus, especially in my DMs and the different people in the community, is advocacy and my diagnosis together make me feel stronger and make me feel um, a bit more I guess I don't even know how to describe it. It's such a unique feeling. I guess it just makes me feel a bit more supported and stronger in when I'm feeling the partnership of advocacy and my diagnosis. But I didn't always feel strong. There were so many times where I was like, I might be mentally getting through this, but my body is not surviving in the way that it should be. I might know in my heart that I'm strong, but I don't feel strong right now. I might know that I'll get through this, but that doesn't mean that right now I don't feel really weak. Tomorrow is going to come no matter what I do, and that's a really awesome fact, but it doesn't change the fact that right now I could not feel more unlike myself and more weak in, my pain, first of all, and then also trying to express it to other people and be like, do you not see what I'm going through, especially with doctors? Do you not believe me? Do you not understand? And in those moments, I definitely felt weak. And even though I was going through them and getting through it with strength, and I would hope with some semblance of grace, um, it didn't always feel like that. And it's funny because when people tell me their stories and they say, I feel so weak, I feel whatever, I'm like, you are not weak. You were getting through it, you were doing whatever. But when it comes to me and my internal dialogue, I did not feel like that. I do not feel like that. Even sometimes to this day, even though I have this platform, I try so hard to be strong and to come off as anything but weak. It doesn't mean that that's always what gets accomplished, if that makes sense.
absolutely. It strength has many aspects. There's physical strength and feeling truly physically strong, and then there is mental strength, which I really think when you boil it down is empowerment. And they say that it's impossible to be afraid and empowered. And a lot of what can happen, I think, is that we get, or someone with chronic illness can become very afraid of what their future is, afraid of this diagnosis, afraid of the pain that they're experiencing, which can kind of, I think, peel back the level of empowerment. But at the same time, I think one gift of advocacy and sharing is that it boosts empowerment. That vulnerability, when it is reinforced with support and community, I think allows and cultivates a level of empowerment that then feeds into what you would perceive as mental strength. And it is hard, though, when your physical being feels like it's crumbling, and then to hold on to your mental strength and still feel like you are walking through your journey with a level of grounding and grace that, others would perceive as strength. So I appreciate that you mentioned both sides of the coin of physical suffering and also mental suffering, and kind of the balance that has to be struck in order to truly feel strong, even though on the outside, looking in at anyone who is walking around with chronic illness, incredibly strong people, mentally and physically, in what we go through and what we endure and what we overcome to live our lives. It's easy to feel like it's not enough and that we're lesser in the moments of the most intense pain and what feels like a mental turmoil spell. But I think even through the ebbs and flows, living and existing and showing up with chronic illness day to day automatically checks the box for both mental and physical strength.
Yeah, and like I completely believe that now, and that is, I think, the message that I try really hard to convey on Her Uterus. But I think it's also important, people say like, how can you stay so strong? You're so inspiring, whatever, which is thank you. That's amazing. But I don't always feel like that. And I
And
wish,
that's normal.
yeah, and I wish that, I guess I saw, especially when I was younger, a little bit more of that. I saw Laura Parker. She really balanced it well when I was watching her as a kid. But beyond that, it was more just like get through it. Like, people are inspiring, like people with chronic illness are inspiring, which is like, yes, absolutely they are. But at the same time, they still have chronic illness and they still are learning to live with it themselves and they're still surviving themselves, which is, like you said, a feat in itself and something to be celebrated in itself and a level of strength in itself. But I just always want to be honest with the people that follow me and say like, today I'm on here doing a podcast and it's I feel strong, I feel good today, but that doesn't mean tomorrow I won't wake up and feel defeated in how my body feels or how my mind feels, and that's okay. It doesn't mean that the day after that I won't feel strong again. Having that balance and knowing that you're always going to get back up, but that it doesn't discount how you feel in that moment is what's helped me.
Do you typically ride the ebbs and flows of those mental feelings of strength versus weakness? It can also be thought of as being kind of balanced versus unbalanced. Or do you take proactive action? Because for myself, even if it's unintentional, a lot of times doing something in the space of advocacy or doing something in the space of sharing with others can, as I've mentioned, kind of boost up that empowerment and then make me feel stronger. So is that what you have found as well? Does that kind of fuel your motivation to share?
Yeah, I think that community is a huge part of why I share everything. I've apologized many a time on Her Uterus for crying or, getting a little bit sad or, talking about intense mental health things that I felt. And then I'll get tons of messages of people being like, please don't stop talking about this because I see myself in you when you talk about those things. I also see myself in you when you talk about the good things, but it's really hard to identify with people who are happy all the time and who are doing well all the time. And so I try really hard to balance it without, also projecting my own feelings and trauma dumping. And, there's a lot of nuances to it. But at the core of Her Uterus, I think for me, at the core of my balance, I guess you could say, is honesty and is sharing the good and the bad, because that's what I so desperately needed. And that's the point of Your Uterus, is to fill a gap that I recognized when I was a young person and that wasn't filled up until I think this point. And now the community is just huge and it's wonderful and it's fantastic. But I didn't have access to that for a long time and now I'm part of it. So it's a really wonderful feeling. But yeah, I think advocacy helps me ride out the waves and to feel less lonely while I ride out the waves as well.
I was reading a quote the other day that said, find your North Star, whatever it is, kindness, compassion, honesty, determination, and just follow it. And it will always take you to a place of fulfillment. And I think honesty, especially in the space of advocacy, is one of the best North Stars, quote unquote, that you could choose, because I think it does make it so relatable and it builds a community that is truly supportive of all the ups and downs that come with life with chronic illness.
Yeah, I hope so. That's just always been my main goal.
Well, I think you are accomplishing all that and so much more on Her Uterus. And I will be sure to link everything in the show notes for today's episode. But where is the best place for people to find you?
Best place is at her_uterus on Instagram. And then from there, everything else is linked. So I would definitely start there.
Okay, perfect. Well, thank you so much for coming on. I've so enjoyed this conversation and it was lovely to talk to you.
Thanks for having me, Morgan. Really appreciate it.